Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday to you all, and welcome to our fourth episode of Gamechanger Sessions. Apologies for the slight delay. We have a few technical difficulties, but really excited to be back. And for those of you who are tuning into our live chat for the first time, this is a weekly series where I have the honor and the privilege of interviewing people who I think are both brilliant minds and really, really magnificent hearts in the world who have a lot of wisdom to share during these uncertain, complex, and changing times. And the reason I decided to put on this weekly series was because I know for myself, in times of change and extraordinary uncertainty, I really wanted to be surrounded by, have access and exposure to people who have really interesting ideas, minds, and mental models that can help. And I just wanted to share these beautiful people in my life who I've come into contact with this community. So that's the intention for Gamechanger Sessions. And thank you for registering for this series. I will say, just quickly, in case you have to disconnect later, our next episode is with an incredibly brilliant mind, Roger Martin. He was somebody who had a huge impact on me in the early years of my life, working at Monitor. And he is one of, I think he was listed in 2017 as the world's #1 management thinker. So very excited for next week. But I want to focus on why we're here today. And it is with the greatest of pleasure and gratitude that I welcome our guest today, Hanna. Julie is somebody who I met many years ago. And I actually had no idea what Julie did or all of her incredible accomplishments. I just met this woman who had this energy that was something I'd never really experienced to that degree. Her energy was just magnificent. And I was drawn to her energy. And I said, I'd really hope I get to know this person. And it was at an event, actually in the tech world, where this kind of energy is rare, but really needed. Julie is a Silicon Valley technologist, entrepreneur, investor, and advisor. And her focus is really around working with companies that are truly changing the world, purpose-driven companies. She has a tremendous list of achievements and accomplishments, everything from being a founder and CEO of 5 venture-backed technology companies. She is the executive chair of one of the most amazing organizations. We're going to chat about this today, Kiva.org. That's really on a mission to make sure there is financial inclusion around the world. She is a special advisor to Google X, the organization or part of Google that is really shooting for moonshots. And that's clearly what we need right now in the world. Julie is a venture partner at Obvious Ventures, another incredible venture firm that's really focused on problems that are very big to solve in the world and a net positive solutions. Julie, in 2015, was appointed by President Barack Obama as the ambassador for global entrepreneurship to really help develop the next generation of entrepreneurs. And she's also on the board of Esalen, and maybe I'm not sure if that's still current or has been, which is a place that's a very special place that we're going to talk about. So welcome, Julie. Thank you so much for being with us today. How are you doing, Julie? How are you today?
I'm really well, thank you. And these times are a reminder of how much fortune we have, and to be grateful, and also hold with heavy heart those that are on the front lines of suffering, which is again a reminder for the fortune and gratitude in my life.
Absolutely. And I'm so delighted that you're here because there's just so much I want to cover with you today. Your experiences and just your life journey is so relevant and interesting to these times. And one of the things that I thought we could start with actually this idea of living in chaotic and complex times. And one of the things I know about you is that you actually grew up on the front lines of war in Jordan. And I'm really curious and would love for you to share, what did you learn living in a different kind of war, than the one we're having today? But what did you learn during those times, and how do you, sort of piece the two together to the times we're living in today?
Yeah, it's interesting that you asked that because one of the things I found myself doing on almost an energetic or a psychic level, responding a little bit to what's happening, unfolding, bringing back memories of the war. And I was quite young. I was 5 years old. And my family hasn't really talked about it. And like most families, when you go through something that extreme, that difficult, you tend to sort of just look ahead and not, talk about these things. And I was chatting with my mother, and we both, for the first time ever, she really doesn't. We don't really talk about the war experience, but she was having a similar experience. Like, oh, this was bringing back memories. I think the reason for that really has to do with the uncertainty that this moment brings, and that is something you certainly experience in wartime. You're thrust into the state of existence where you realize nothing is guaranteed, and that all you have really that is guaranteed is the present moment, but you're not entitled to the next moment. You're actually not entitled to anything. And very quickly, kind of the reality can shift, just the way it has for us with COVID. We went from a world where we maybe unknowingly felt we were quite entitled to a lot of things that we took for granted in our lives. And then overnight, seemingly, we realize actually nothing is guaranteed. And living with that uncertainty and that ambiguity is something that, of course, can be quite unsettling. But hidden gifts in these things, you learn to not take anything for granted. Gratitude. And so there are many hidden gifts of an experience of adversity and difficulty like we're going through now. And I've learned over the course of my life, maybe because we're all human beings are meaning-making machines, but when you try to make sense of difficult experiences like living through a war, you look for the meaning and the lessons in it as a way to move ahead. At least I certainly have, and I found many, many great lessons in that. I'd say, one of the things that's common maybe to what's happening today and living in a war-torn region is war is a great equalizer. And, we've certainly, we're experiencing that now with COVID. Now, it's not entirely an equalizer because there are those of us who are living on what I would call the front lines of suffering. They have to either go into jobs that put their lives at risk. Many times they're doing that in service to us. When you think about the grocery store workers, they're there so that we can shelter at home comfortably. The healthcare workers, the people that can't afford to not work, that are in jobs that are continuing on. So you have kind of those of us who don't have healthcare insurance. So we have many of us on the front lines of suffering. And their existence is not equal, but we are equally vulnerable to what is unfolding in terms of our existence and our health.
I think that's really, really true. And it's really interesting. I mean, I also come from, I didn't quite come from a war-torn country, but it was a country that was very complex and very chaotic and had the highest crime rate in the world and the ends of apartheid. And I think what you're saying, that uncertainty and learning to live with that, definitely resonates with me, and that equalizing of some elements of this change. So thank you for sharing that. And, I think one of the things that a lot of people are facing right now is just how do you find this calm in the chaos, right? So that resilience you have from, leaving a war-torn country, and that post-traumatic stress growth, it's remarkable. And, you can see it in what you've done since then. But one area I'm really interested in, or a lot of people are talking about, is just how to manage the anxiety, the fear, the mental health of such an existence right now. And I know a place that I've always aspired to go, I haven't quite got there yet, is Esalen. And for those of you on the call who aren't familiar with Esalen, it's a magical, magical place in California. The mission of Esalen, I'll just read to you and you'll understand what I'm talking about. It says, is the leading center for exploring and realizing human potential through experience, education, and research. And so Julie is Julie, are you on the board of Esalen today? Is that?
I was on the board. I'm no longer serving on the board.
Yeah.
But a great many friends and people that I thought
Sure.
great inspiration, including the founder, Michael Murphy.
Amazing. And, one of the things that I've been so inspired by is just your blending of Eastern philosophy with Western business. And so, I'd love to hear some of the lessons that you've learned and sort of the advice you have for how to bring some of that Eastern philosophy around the work you've done at Esalen into helping people manage this new level of uncertainty and fear that a lot of people are facing.
Yeah, well, you said the key word there, which is uncertainty and fear. And I think when the emotions that we have that arise, one of the things that happens in the mind is when we experience something like fear or anxiety, our mind wants to tell us that that's a permanent state. And then we become attached to that state and we panic. Am I always going to be fearful? Am I always going to be anxious? And then that creates more fear and more anxiety. And then we can get stuck kind of in this loop. And so one of the, I think, really great and enduring lessons of Eastern tradition and really of all ancient wisdom across the world is this notion of temporariness. That the universe, everything in the universe, everything about us is constantly moving, changing. Nothing is in a permanent state. Everything is always changing and evolving. And our emotions, perhaps most of all, are quite temporary. So, this where expressions like this too shall pass come from is this sort of learning to remind ourselves when we're kind of frozen in fear that this too shall pass, that the next moment could bring something different. And if you notice how we have great capacity for range of emotions. So we can go one moment from being despairing to laughing to joy from second to second. So we have this great dynamic range of emotions that we're capable of, but sometimes our minds can cause us to think, oh no, I'm always going to be in this fearful, anxious state until I know everything's going to be okay. I think one of the lessons of what's happening right now is actually giving us the opportunity to realize that this idea that we thought everything was going to be okay is an illusion, which is another sort of teaching of, again, many ancient traditions, and certainly in Eastern tradition, is that we live with the illusion of control. And when you experience something like war, when you experience something like COVID, it teaches you a humility and a grace that there are forces larger than you that you're a part of. And so you go from how do I control my externalities, which is kind of a brittle construct if you think about it. It's exhausting to try to control everything. But we're kind of taught to do that. Agency is about you control this, you make this happen. It's a very active sort of doing energy and a state that we've come to really celebrate and be attached to, certainly in the Western thinking, which blinds us to the fact that there are actually forces much bigger than us, and that the the antidote to fear and anxiety, or even the need to control, comes from finding a grace and harmonizing with what is. And in order to harmonize it, you have to be willing to see the truth of what's there and move past the illusion. So, for example, if we succeed professionally, we can tell ourselves a story. It's because I worked hard, I was really smart, I made it happen. Or we can tell ourselves a fuller story that says, yes, working hard, being intelligent are important ingredients, and there's a lot of divine luck and fortune and timing and things that are larger than us that can contribute to our success. And if we understand that more fully, we can actually learn to recognize when those forces are present, those conditions are present, and then we can actually learn to harmonize with them, which is sort of what people who can find maybe success over and over again on some instinctual or intuitive level learn to do. So I've been reflecting a lot about even your characterization of COVID, and I'm not picking on it because I think it's a very common one, that we think of COVID as we're in a war. And that frame is kind of interesting because there is no harmony in war. War is about controlling and prevailing over something, about eradicating something that we have deemed unacceptable, wrong, vanquishing. And so that actually creates sort of a perpetual cycle of power over that keeps us in, okay, a whack-a-mole game, we power over this, and then something else bigger comes along. If you look at sort of the escalating arms race of what we've unleashed with antibiotics is a good example of this war we're in with microbes. And in doing that, we've kind of created an escalating race. We've killed off a lot of things in our own body ecosystem and the environmental ecosystem that are very needed to achieve a balance, a harmonious balance. And we're learning that in very difficult, painful ways. And so, the idea of the revelations around things like probiotics, for example, are how do we create a harmonious, a homeostasis, a balance, rather than this idea that you have to kill something off to survive. And I think we're learning that with COVID, that COVID is largely about an imbalance. And so I'll stop there, but
I think that's really powerful. And I know just personally for me, I've had to sort of really rethink somebody who's like a very alpha driven immigrant, person. I've really shifted to this idea of what you were saying, which is, the force versus flow, and how they're very powerful, but the one is really forceful. And thank you for pointing out that war, analogy versus an energetic flow, or a harmonious balance. And so finding the calm and the chaos, just relating back to that, for me, that's, the wisdom that you shared there has really helped me, which has been how to let go of the things I can't control and have a bit more flow, and ability to be, it's a bit more fluid than the force piece. And so thank you. I think that's really powerful, just in terms of how you are sort of taking that analogy and even taking it one step further in thinking about COVID, right, in a more harmonious way. One of the points, Julie, that you made to me a few days ago is you said COVID is in some ways a mirror. And I thought that was a really interesting way of framing COVID. And so maybe I'd love for you to explain that a bit more as we start to begin to unpack what COVID really means for society right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I think is a helpful, at least for me, an antidote to uh, the fear, anxiety that arises out of uncertainty is moving into curiosity and looking for where the hidden gifts and lessons are in things. And when we do that, when we're confronted with adversity, it teaches us a resilience, and there's a kind of a wisdom that we get that cannot be gotten through any other means than when we experience adversity directly. And so we have a really wonderful opportunity now to kind of say, where is Corona a teacher for us? And I want to start by actually, there's a quote that I've been reflecting on by Sonia Renee Taylor, who's a beautiful poet and author. And she said, we will not go back to normal. Normal never was. Our pre-corona existence was not normal, other than that we normalized things like greed and inequity, exhaustion, depletion, extraction, disconnection, confusion, rage, hoarding, hate, and lack. We should not long to return to these things. Mm-hmm. We are being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and nature. And for me, she really captured the reflections I've been having about COVID. The parallelism is fascinating, even to sort of see that, it affects us in our lungs. And my hope is that it's waking us up to the fact that we have been affecting the Earth's lungs for a very long time. The Earth's lungs are hurting. Our lungs are hurting. We are not separate from the Earth. We're a part of this sort of highly interdependent ecosystem, even though as human beings, we can often forget that and think we're very separate. It's teaching us where we're strong and where we're weak, where we're resilient and where we're not. And even, seeing, for example, in the United States, the number of people who, because their employment vanished overnight, are without healthcare insurance at a time when they're most vulnerable in their life, is a wonderful opportunity to see, we have some aspects of the scaffolding of our society we thought were okay, this idea of linking health insurance to employment. Well, now we see where that's brittle and weak in a really significant way. Or it is teaching us that an act of self-preservation and an act of compassion are one and the same, because sheltering in place isn't just about our own survival, it is about contributing to the survival of others. Mm-hmm. And I think in that we see our own agency. It's easy to think, what does my vote matter? What does the act of one person mean? It's about those great, all-powerful people in leadership positions that control our destiny. But in fact, what we saw when you looked at the map, and that one person, if they infect 2.3 people, the velocity at which this goes in a very short period of time, that one act of infecting 2.3 people can infect thousands. All of a sudden, you see, actually, any singular act has an exponential effect. So that's in the risk category, but an act of kindness, an act of generosity can also multiply exponentially. And so I think that there are, many, many lessons, and they're endless. And I think hopefully they're contributing to our individual and collective wisdom to sort of say, what is that new garment of humanity that we want to now stitch, knowing what we know now and having our eyes opened beyond maybe some illusions that we've been living with.
I think that's such a beautiful way of framing it, and really, really powerful. And, one of the things I thought would be so interesting to hear your perspective on is you are doing and have done such amazing work in both, resource-rich countries like the US, and your comment on seeing where the scaffolding is broken, but you're also doing a tremendous amount of work in resource-poor countries with your work at Kiva. What are you noticing about the difference in COVID's impact and response from, resource poor countries to resource-rich countries?
Yeah, well, maybe to begin with, for those who may not be familiar with Kiva, Kiva invented the crowdfunding model almost 15 years ago, and it was about crowdsourcing small amounts of money for loans to micro entrepreneurs living kind of in the riskiest, most underserved parts of the world. And in that time, we've loaned about $1.5 billion that's reached millions of entrepreneurs across literally the money's come from 190 countries, entrepreneurs in 80 countries, including here in the US. And so the insight that we got in doing that was actually there's about 3 billion people that are unbanked. Many of them don't have formal identities. They could never walk into a bank. That we could actually reach them through technology, and there's a potential to sort of create a world where that has financial inclusion for all, where there is no financial exclusion, and that's sort of our mission. You know, the impact of COVID has been quite significant, and there are differences between resource poor and resource rich countries. We've been through kind of versions of this with Ebola. When Ebola hit, it quite had a meaningful impact. The borrowers, whether they were becoming ill and sadly in many cases passing away, were not able to repay loans, or were at risk of not being able to repay loans, and or even apply for loans. And so you see kind of the on the ground impact of that. Today, what we're seeing is that in many countries, because of the shutdown, people are not able to come and apply for loans. Our partners, field partners that we work with to identify borrowers, are at risk of completely collapsing. So we've been looking at ways of raising capital funds, larger capital funds, to shore them up so that they can get through this period of time. Here in the U.S., as we all know, kind of the small businesses have been devastated, and we've raised the loan size to $15,000. These are interest-free loans in hopes that, and are kind of trying to get the word out as much as possible that they can apply for these loans. The loan size is higher, they're interest-free, in hopes that begins to sort of mitigate the impact. So the effects are a bit different, because if you have access to an internet connection, even though you have to shelter in place, you can actually apply for a loan. In other parts of the world where you don't have access to the internet and you're locked down physically and you can't go in to apply for a loan at a microfinance institution, then the impact is more severe. So that's one very, very stark impact right now.
For sure. No, I think that's really interesting. And one of the things that you and I also talked about, I'm from South Africa, and I'll sort of paint this picture, right? When I grew up during apartheid, and we knew the world, it was very explicit that there was terrible, terrible racism in South Africa. And as a child growing up, I was so deeply ashamed and aware of a society that could operate like that. But what was so striking for me was that when I came to North America, that racism still existed. And, as an idealistic young person, I didn't think that should be the case. I grew up in this place where it was, explicit and awful, and yet it was implicit. And so I'm curious around how you feel about the US, like the wealthiest country in the world, having such a devastating impact on society. And, one of the questions I want to ask, because you've worked at the highest levels of government and seen so much, is just how do we grapple with the failure of markets and government in the US moving forward?
Yeah, I think that this is one of those moments where the illusion, the idea that we have about the kind of system that we have created in the U.S. Is the illusion is sort of being peeled away. So the illusion about how much inequity we have in a resource-rich environment, right? You typically don't see this kind of inequity in resource-rich, sort of advanced societies. And I think we've had an identity that really wasn't happening. That you had large middle classes, et cetera, and that steady erosion of the middle class and the growing inequity from the poorest to the wealthiest over the recent decades. I think there's been a lot of systemic denial about that, because our identity as a country has been that this is the American dream, that anyone can rise to any level of material and financial success. And yet what we're seeing is actually it's not the equal opportunity world that we had thought we had created.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's something very healthy about seeing the truth of that, so that we can reckon with it. Something very healthy about the ideology that you don't need a social safety net, that it's up to all of us to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, and there's almost a bit of a blaming people for their broken circumstances and sort of stigmatizing them for somehow not being capable enough or motivated enough to thrive. And I know that one of the things that I kind of, really has stayed with me from my own experience of immigrating to the US, being a refugee, is that, just because your circumstances are broken doesn't mean that you are. And yet people will look at you through the lens of your broken circumstances and conclude that you may be. And that's kind of, I think, that's a challenge in the way that we tend to look at things here in the US. When we look at homeless people, we look at them and we sort of theorize about why they're in those circumstances, and we sort of blame them for it, rather than saying, oh, where is it our system has failed people who are vulnerable or who may be weak, or where is the fabric of society really been stretched and not holding us? And to be able to ask those questions without immediately moving into a dualistic mind of, oh, therefore you're talking about a socialist communist state, which really stops that exploration and the learning about where are we strong and where are we weak? Where do we need to shore ourselves up?
Well, that's so powerful. And, last week we had Albert Wenger, who is a phenomenal investor, but also a huge proponent of universal basic income. And, just in comment to what you're talking about, it is asking us to reframe what a social safety net is. And, one of the things that I'm happy to be talking to you from Canada, where our construct of, healthcare and education is quite different. So we don't have that much time, because I have lots of people who want to ask you questions. And so I want to move on. I want to look at the future. And you are somebody who's always been at the forefront of the future and actually creating a net positive world. And, I'd love to hear a little bit about what your highest dream is right now, as it relates to the kinds of new products and services and platforms we're gonna create in your work as a venture partner at Obvious, and certainly your work with Google X. What do you hope we are able to do with technology and business for good to help create a new society?
Well, I've long viewed there's an unprecedented power in high tech, which is the ability to reach mass scale at a speed that we've never known before. And so when you look at it through that lens, you say, wow, for the first time ever, we can actually boil the ocean problems that we always thought were intractable. The scale problems of, poverty that affects billions of people actually is solvable. If Facebook can reach 2 billion people, if cell phones can reach virtually every human being on the planet, then we can actually solve mass scale problems. So that's sort of the macro hope that I've always sort of worked with as a technologist. I'm particularly passionate about, I think that many systemic problems are solved through the lens of fair access. And so, if you think about the power of technology, its ability to democratize access, whether it's, Google putting the world's information into everyone's hands rather than making it the exclusive domain of a privileged few, that's inherently democratizing. What Kiva is seeking to do with democratizing access to capital. The work at Google X is, by definition, the moonshot definition is solving a problem that affects 1 billion people or more. And so this idea that you can actually, if you seek to solve scale challenges that affect large numbers of people, you actually have the potential to build the most enduring and successful businesses and institutions for humanity. And that there's a great harmony between purpose and profit, that they're not these dualistic opposites that we've sort of told ourselves they are. So my hope is that a lot of these principles, what we're seeing now unfold, is going to really help us internalize that possibility. The recognition that, we see the million and billion flowers that bloom, the endless kind of human creativity that gets expressed every day on the internet, teaches us talent is universal, but opportunity isn't. How can we democratize opportunity? So I think that notion of fair access really begins to solve many, many problems. You had a world that provides fair access to education. The pillars of dignity, to me, are about education, health, and access to capital and information. If we had fair access to those 4 pillars of what I believe really kind of are foundational to living a dignified life, if we come to view these things as inalienable human rights, then we solve many, many, many systemic problems that we think we have to sort of go address kind of individually in a kind of a whack-a-mole approach in an isolated manner.
Wow, that is such a great way of thinking about that. And one of the things I'm going to end with, I have 2 last things to end with, and then I'm going to hand it over to, or at least read you some of the questions from this very engaged audience here. So one is, in a post-COVID world, do you think, I'm sitting here in the Toronto tech ecosystem. I know you were so gracious. You came for Elevate when we launched that festival to be our keynote speaker. And we talked a lot about the role of democratizing Silicon Valley and access, to Silicon Valley and the network effects of Silicon Valley. And so do you think we're going to see more opportunities for Google X and Obvious Ventures to look to our ecosystem for helping to solve these problems? Or do you think because countries are getting more nationalistic in their borders right now, we're going to see less of that?
So these 2 tensions are going to continue to coexist. And I don't see it as an either or. And the tension around a nationalism is really born out of, if you kind of say, what's healthy about that? Protectionism tends to sort of have a constraining effect, but what's healthy about it is that there's an impulse that says, hey, we have not found a way to care for the people that live within our borders. And how do we do that? Now, the conclusion that the way you do that is by protecting and shutting out has a bit of a, again, dualistic mind to it. But the impulse to care for the citizens is actually a healthy one. And then what I think what we're working out with ourselves is really a protectionistic way of doing that the right answer, or is there actually a global cooperation that helps lift us all up? And I think we're in this dance of discovering what that mix looks like. So I actually think you cannot put the genie back in the bottle in a way of what we have discovered around, what the internet has enabled and what technology has allowed us to see is what used to only be possible locally is now possible globally. And it's creating the sense that we live in this global digital village. And it's reminding us of how interconnected we are. And that is only strengthening with time. And that is a force that's going to continue to evolve and emerge and develop. If you look at, the open source movement, my work with Mozilla kind of gives me a window into that. Like we're continuing to evolve in our ability to understand how to cooperate and collaborate and coordinate across time and distance using technology. And at the same time, we're trying to figure out what are the constructs that allow us to take care of citizens within our borders.
Amazing. I'm so glad you pushed me on the duality of that choice, because I think it is definitely an and, as you're saying. Julie, I could spend another 3 hours or more asking you to hear more of your wisdom, but I'm going to hand it over to some of the amazing questions we're being asked. So first off, thank you for such a rich conversation. Our first question is from Ron Nakagawa. I apologize if I pronounced your name wrong. Ron asked, can you just quickly repeat the 4 pillars because they were so valuable? So I'm going to ask if you don't mind doing that.
I regard them as the kind of pillars of dignity: fair access to education, to healthcare, to capital, and to information. And I would put housing there, but what we see again with Kiva time and again is that access to capital is quite central because it solves so many of those issues of access to housing and even healthcare and education. But yeah, those are the 4 pillars that I was referring to.
Excellent. Thank you. Great. So we have a question from Gary Fernell. Gary says, Julie, are we heading towards real substantive change? For example, a post-capitalist world? And will it be better? Have we perhaps overly celebrated entrepreneurship of all kinds at any cost? Sustainable, earth and people-friendly is what we need, not short-term profitable businesses.
Great question. I think what implicit in your question that I hear is this idea that we tend to solve for problems through solutions that kind of give us an equal and opposite extreme. And so then we end up kind of in this ping pong. And you're right, we've overdone it with celebrating entrepreneurialism in a form of it that has, sometimes kind of what are some of the low sides of the way we practice it. The cult of personality, the mythology that people are self-made and they do it unto themselves. And that's actually a real myth. For any of us who've been entrepreneurs, we know that our ability to survive and thrive and succeed depends on this invisible scaffolding of people that take a chance on us, that believe in us even when we don't believe in ourselves. And there's a web of humanity there that holds up every entrepreneur. But we don't tell that story. We've over-celebrated entrepreneurialism to the point of kind of thinking we don't really need systems. And we've forgotten that the government funded the internet, which enabled all of this innovation to prosper. And so we kind of think, hey, we don't need government. And so our memories can be a bit short and we can be a little bit extreme. I think the post-capitalistic world is an interesting question. I think that the most harmonious way that brings the maximum number of people along in the evolution of how you advance sort of the human ecosystem is in a way that is gradual and not too dramatic. Revolutions tend to have a ping pong effect. Now, sometimes you need the activism to wake up a collective around an important truth that we're asleep about. And I think that we're having that moment right now. But then in seeking to solve around the wake up, if we're not careful to do that in a way that brings a lot of people, as many people along as possible, to do that in a gradual way that doesn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, then we can continue the ping pong kind of dualistic effect. And so will we get to a post-capitalistic world? I don't know. But what I look for is where is the intersection in that duality? Because that's where the answers are. Where is capitalism serving us well? And where is the construct that we have employed around the model of capitalism we practice not serving us? And where can it be modified? Where have we made socialistic constructs a dirty word where they could actually serve us? What are models of that are succeeding? Social democracies, representative democracies that are succeeding, and where can we learn from them? Those are kind of more, I think we would do well to spend more time in the question, and not be so impatient about getting to an answer. Sometimes we want to communicate about conclusions and find answers when we haven't fully understood the problem or the question. And so catching ourselves and stepping back from that, saying, do we really understand the problem that we're solving? And have we given full consideration to the range of possibilities? And, since the question was about capitalism, where does it serve us well? Where does it not? How do we evolve it? And maybe eventually we do get to a post-capitalistic world, but I'd say right out of the gate, that would be a pretty jarring conclusion.
Yeah. That's great. So we only have time for a few more, but one that I thought would be great to hear is actually some of your recommendations on resources, books, people that you feel are giving you some insight and mental models and wisdom right now. People would love for you to be able to share some of the books and resources that you would recommend, Julie, right now.
I think at this moment in time, the books that have really helped me at crucial moments, and these are well-known books, and there's a reason why they're well-known. Viktor Frankl's Search for Meaning. It's that frame, that insight that in the most dire and adverse of circumstances, that the greatest freedom is the one that lies within, and our ability to choose is a very, very powerful and important lesson for human beings. And at moments like this, we can discover the great freedom that lies within us when we feel so constrained from our external reality. When I was in my 20s, a book that really kind of had a meaningful impact on my life was The Road Less Traveled by Scott Peck. And I think that's probably an oldie in this day and time, but I think there's a lot of timeless wisdom in it. I also, there are, many Buddhist teachers that write in a way that's very accessible in the West, where you don't have to be a Buddhist. Pema Chodron is one of them. And there's a wonderful book that I think has become quite popular right now, but I've relied on it over the years, When Things Fall Apart. And it really kind of, talks about her own journey with that and discovering the hidden gifts in moments when things fall apart. And for many of us, it can feel like the world that we relied on is falling apart. There's an excellent book by Matthew Ricard called Happiness. And there's a lot of happiness books out there. I would say this one to me is the most profound. Matthew is a Buddhist monk, and he looks at happiness from a Western scientific perspective and an Eastern philosophical perspective. And there's sort of a harmony and a crossroads where those two meet that I found to be, it's good food for the left brain analytical mind, and good for the right brain sort of, and kind of the spiritual mind, if you will.
That's amazing. Julie, I would love to ask so many more questions. The one last question that I'd ask, because it's selfish, it's actually a question that Gary Fernell asked here as well, which is, who would you like to see on a Gamechanger session? Who do you think is interesting right now in these times to be talking to?
Well, gosh, you've already had two of my favorite people who I feel fortunate to know. One of them because of you, in Margaret Atwood and Adam Grant. Let me ponder. Do you want to ask me another question
Sure.
while I ponder that, or we can just see?
You can tweet about after, because I always like to give people a few minutes to get back to whatever they're doing. I know 2 o'clock is usually the start of a meeting. So what I will take this time to do is just a huge thank you. Thank you to Julie. Your wisdom and your grace and your insights is just so appreciated and just so powerful right now, certainly for me. And I can tell by the engagement of this community how much they just loved everything you had to say. So first off, thank you for taking the time. I know you're exceptionally busy, and I've really enjoyed having you here. And I just think your energy and the beauty in the way that you think, however it can be amplified, will make this a much brighter post-COVID world. So thank you very much for coming on our show today. And
thank you, Candice. It's my great honor to be with you. And I want to say I'm grateful that you're creating the space for this kind of reflection and conversation, which is so very needed. It's good medicine. And it is a road less traveled. So thank you for bringing that to the world. And I have someone for you, actually, as a guest, Fred Kaufman, whose work I've admired, and I have the fortune to be working with him at the moment. He has written much about conscious business, conscious leadership.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. I've actually heard him speak, so that's fabulous. Yeah, okay. Great idea. Yeah. That's great. Thank you. And yes, I think he could be super, super valuable to our audience. So thank you. And before I let everyone go, I have a few people I really want to also say thank you to. So first off, this isn't just me, it's a team of people. Our production partner is Ether Live, who makes it all look so good and makes this work. Corey Marr, who's our executive producer, and Marone Tadas, who is super helpful in putting this together. And we have some amazing partners in Elevate, Artery, York University, Toronto Life, CBC, TechTO. All of these people are really interested in putting these great game-changing ideas and thoughts in the world. And last, I actually want to make a quick mention of an incredible organization run by Claudia Hepburn. She's the CEO. It's an organization called Windmill Microlending. And it's very much in the vein of Kiva, helping immigrants who come to Canada get access to microloans. And on behalf of Gamechanger Sessions, Julie, we will be making a donation to Windmill Microlending, because we think it's just in honor of what you're doing. And also just want other people who are, enjoying these series, at the end of every show, I am going to suggest a way you could help. And Windmill Microlending has been enabling Canadian immigrants to afford the cost and navigate the challenges of gaining Canadian qualifications and employment by using their loans. So just wanted to make a quick mention. And also, please support all of the amazing stuff that Julie's doing with kiva.org and entrepreneurs. Obvious Ventures, I know you've made a bunch of Canadian investments, actually. I saw Reno Run and also Darwin AI. So, if you're doing net positive work in the world, make sure you are thinking of Obvious Ventures. And thank you so much, Julie. Really appreciate you joining us today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Great. Take care.